Getting started. Okay, so in the way that we approach Project 2, we're going to apply that here as well. And that was first identifying what is the behavior or action that we want our jQuery to kick off with. So if we just take a moment to hop back into the completed application, let's walk through some of the steps to adding a to-do list item. So firstly, the user adds input into this form field, and then Add to List is clicked or Enter is pushed to add the list item. So returning back into our HTML, let's go ahead and find the form element. So you can see that we have a form here. It has a class of add items, has a basic text input, and it has this button that has a type of submit. So this is going to submit our form response for us. So understanding where to get started, there's a couple different ways that we could approach this problem. So in the way that we learned the click method for our last project, that's one way that we could approach our form here. We could listen for a click on the button with the class of add, and then execute our code to add a list item to our unordered list. However, jQuery is tremendously helpful with forms. And so if we go back to the jQuery documentation, I think that's a better place to get started. So at our API documentation, if we scroll down to the left here, we can see that there's actually a whole area dedicated to forms. So this provides us methods and event handlers for working with forms. And knowing a little bit about what we just talked about, the fact that our form is being submitted by the button at the bottom, let's just keep that in mind as we look through some of these methods that it provides. So, well, here's a clue. At the bottom, there's a submit method. So let's go ahead and examine that. So this is going to bind an event handler to the submit JavaScript event. So very similarly with the way we worked with click, we can work with this submit event as well. So going back into our application, that's going to be our first step. We're going to bind this submit method to our actual form. And since our form has a class name of add items, that's going to be our first selector. So in our index.js, we can go ahead and remove this comment. And we're going to say add items. So there we are with our first selector. And now we're going to add our submit method here. And then fill it out with just our basic function. Awesome. So here's our basic skeleton for adding items to our list. And as we know, console.log is one of the safest ways to get started knowing that our code is going to perform how we want. So in this case, I say we should go ahead and just console log a message to confirm that our submit function is working correctly. Save this, and then returning to our project, going to go ahead and refresh this. And I'm going to open the inspect element tool to the console. So now when we click add to list, we should see the message that I just said to log. Okay, so if you just noticed, hi was there for 1 second and then it just went away. So you can try that again so you can see it. So just a brief snippet of hi and then it's gone. So why is that happening? Well, if we go back into our submit documentation, maybe that will give us some clues. So scrolling through the submit documentation, let's see if we can find any insight as to why our console.log is not performing as we would expect. Scrolling down, let's see if we can find a relevant example to the way we structured our code. Okay, so here's a great example. They have a form with the ID of target, and down here they have that form, and chained to it is the submit method. So One thing different that you'll notice here is we have access to the event, and event prevent default is being called here. So why is that happening? Well, submit, for instance, has a default action. It's going to submit the value that the user just input into the form to a database, for instance. But this submission is actually the default process for when the submit event happens. And what is happening here is the event is being intercepted. We want to prevent the default behavior and perform our own action. So event prevent default is something very common that you'll see when working in the browser and when working with browser events. And if you want to read a little bit more on it, you can go to the documentation page for event prevent default. So down here you can see another great example. So basically, it's going to prevent the default action from being called. And in this case, the default action is an A tag with an href to jQuery.com. So typically, when an A tag is clicked, it's going to redirect the user to the href attached. And in this case, the click is being intercepted, preventing the user from being redirected, and our own code is being executed as to how to handle this click. So that's similar to what we're going to do in our application. We're going to intercept the submit event. We're going to take the user's input and perform our own action with it. Are you with me? So returning to our application, let's apply this new knowledge and include event prevent default and see if we have our console.log working as we would expect. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this here, return to our application, and then before our console.log hi, I'm going to put our event prevent default. Additionally, I'm going to need access to the event here, else it's going to say the event is unknown. So let's return back to our application, refresh the page, and then when I add a to-do list item, we have our hi here sticking around. So that's awesome. One thing you'll notice though, that submit event was actually clearing our input field. So now we have our input field still with our old input. That's something we'll tackle later, but just keep a note of that for now.